Salim, thank you very much for that introduction. You know, when they asked us to come speak at Founders Day, I said, oh my, are we that old? And I guess we are, because we met on this campus 54 years ago. And, you know, the very first speaker at Founders Day was Stuart Morris. And that was on November the 16th, 1964. And we were in the audience at Convocation to hear that talk that day. Now, don't ask me to remember what Stuart had to say that day, but we were here then. What we'd like to do today is to kind of give you some insight into what HBC was like between the years of 1964 and 1968. But I think, first of all, it may be good to kind of give you a few facts about 1964 to 1968. First of all, there were no cell phones back then. There were no laptops back then. There were no video games back then. There was no social media back then. You know, we really wrote letters to one another and cards to one another back then, or we just picked up the phone and talked to each other on the telephone. There were no cable TV channels back then. There was just ABC, NBC, and CBS. That was it. That's where you saw your programs or watched your news was there. The population in Houston back then was 930,000 people. We have grown significantly since that time frame. There was only 10 high schools in Houston. Only 10 high schools. I don't know what there are now in the greater Houston area, but probably 30 or 40 high schools in the greater Houston area now. Okay, now grab this, guys. The price of gas was 30 cents a gallon back then. And then when they would have a gas war, it would get down to 19 cents a gallon. I have bought gas for 19 cents a gallon before back then. A brand new home in Sharpstown or in Meyerland would have cost you $18,000 back then, $18,000. But don't get too excited. A new car would cost you $3,000. We bought a brand new 1957 Chevrolet before I came to school here for $2,500. But the average annual salary was only $6,000 a year. So it all kind of balances out whenever you kind of take a look at what it was like. The Southwest Freeway was not completed. I-69 didn't exist. 59 South stopped basically from a freeway standpoint at Fondren. Fondren Road only went to Clairwood on the north side of the school. Went to Clairwood, just on the other side of what Sharpstown Mall was, is where it went. And then south on Fondren, we went a couple of blocks south, just south of Beachtown. You couldn't get all the way to Braeswood or past then. It was not available. You couldn't get there from here. There was just not a lot going on out here. This was really a prairie out here. It was a farmer rice paddy where this university was established way back then. Sharpstown Mall was brand new, and it was the first air-conditioned mall in Houston, Texas. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective of what it was back at that time frame. So we want to kind of share a little bit about our experiences at HBC, Houston Baptist College, in those first few years of existence of the university. So I'd like to turn it over to Helen. But first of all, I'd like to say she's a real trooper to be out here today. She did something to her knee about a week ago, and we think she has a torn meniscus. And at church this past Sunday, her knee locked up and she went down, and so we didn't know if she's going to be able to make it or not. So when she's through with her part, she's going to sit in one of these chairs back here if it's okay with you guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Helen to share a little bit about her early experiences.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to let you know why I ended up coming to Houston Baptist College. I grew up in Houston. I went to Baptist Temple Church. I went to Reagan High School, which is now Heights High. But I didn't plan to go to college. I planned to be a secretary because that's what my mother was. Well, that was until I took secretarial courses like typing and shorthand. I decided at that point being a secretary was not for me. So then I decided, well, I could be a teacher because back then girls were either secretaries, teachers, or nurses. That was about it. So, but if I was going to be a teacher, I had to go to college. So I began looking around at colleges, and I decided I was going to go to Hardin-Simmons. I had a cousin that went there, and I applied and was accepted, and I even had a roommate. Then I got a scholarship from Houston Baptist College. So I decided I would come here. My degrees were in elementary education and English, and during my teaching career, I actually taught elementary school for several years, and I ended my career in high school special education teaching English. So I was able to use both of my majors in my career. I moved into the dorm the weekend before school started in the fall of 1964. And at that time, there were only 2 classes. We were the freshmen, and there were sophomores. So the night before school started, the sophomores put on a talent show for us in the gym, which was the only place where the entire student body could come. My suite mates and I all attended the concert and the talent show, and we sat right in front of a group of boys, which included Don and his twin brother, Bob. Campus back then had very few buildings when we arrived. So walking across campus was like walking across a field. I ruined several umbrellas walking across the field in the rain and in the wind. Our only source of food on campus was the cafeteria, and that was in a corner of the student center. Women students were supposed to wear dresses most of the time, but on Saturdays we could wear pedal pushers, capris as you would call them now, to the cafeteria to get our food. Very few students had cars back then, so we were literally stuck on campus unless someone came to pick us up and take us somewhere. On Sundays, South Main Baptist Church sent a bus to campus, so many of us got involved in the activities there because it was a way to get to church without walking, because there were very few that were in walking distance. There were very few fast food restaurants back then. Chick-fil-A didn't exist. McDonald's had been started, but there were very few in Houston, and there were none near the campus. So the only place we could go for fast foods was the Chuck Wagon, which was on Bissonnet, or the Purple Cow, which was on Hillcroft. If we needed anything for our dorm rooms or anything, we would go to Kmart. There was a Kmart near, but there was nothing else where we could get the staples like that. Our tuition was $19 an hour, and we took 18 hours a semester, so it cost us about $360 to get a semester of tuition. The dorm cost about $500 a semester, so we could go to an entire year of college for about $1,700. So it was much less expensive back then, but again, the salaries were a whole lot less. The curriculum was very different back then. We each had to take core classes, and they were different each year that you were at school. We all remembered junior core because that was the one that was the hardest. It was based on sciences, and science was not my main subject, so I was terrified of junior core. But one of the statements that everybody learned that year was, "Chance favors a prepared mind." by Louis Pasteur because that's something they repeated all the time. We also learned several types of architecture. And I thought that was strange, but later on it became important to me because when I took the national teacher exam, there were questions about architecture, and I knew the answers because I'd been in junior corps. The women on campus began forming social clubs, not sororities, just social clubs. There were the Triceans and the Epsilon Delta Pi, which we called ED Pi for short. I became a founding member of the Triceans, and it later became the Phi Mu Society, sorority, that is some sisters. About the same time, our mothers and some of the other women who were associated with the school decided to start the Women's Auxiliary. And my mother and Don's mother both became founding members of the auxiliary, which later became the Guild. One of the things that we had to do, and you're having to do it as well, was take Convocation or chapel. We had one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. Convocation usually was on Tuesday and chapel was on Thursday. But I remember one of the speakers, and it wasn't because he made a great speech. It was because of what happened during his speech. It was a very famous pastor, and his name was R.G. Lee, and he was the pastor of Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, a huge church in Memphis back then. And he had a famous sermon called Payday Someday. But by the time he came to HBU, he was at the end of his career, and he was about 80 years old. He had his speech in front of him on paper, and about halfway through his speech, his papers fell to the floor. He reached down, picked them up, rearranged them in order, and began his speech again, from the beginning. We were mortified because it was lunchtime and we were ready to go to lunch, but we sat there very quietly because we knew we had better sit quietly and listen to the rest of the speech again. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Don and let him tell you more about our.
Well, you can imagine it really took quite a leap of faith for those of us that were in the founding classes here at HBU or HBC back then to come to HBC. The university, when we came, was only 1 year old at that time, and the first year they only had 190 students is what they had in the freshman class the very first year. And in our year that started, we had 210 freshmen in 64. The physical plant was minimal, was really not much. It was the quadrangle, and that was really not an administrative quadrangle, it was more of an academic quadrangle because most of the classes were held in that area. We had Atwood 1, we had Denham Hall, we had Sharp Gym, we had 2 dorms, men's and women's dorms, and we had the Hinton House where Dr. Hinton lived. And now that's the Alumni Center, or the Hinton House, the Alumni Center is there. And that was the campus. That was it. And between the quadrangle and the dorms, it was one little tiny sidewalk that went like that and then like that into the dorms. And the vast majority of the time was underwater because it had been a rice paddy, and so it was very low and it was underwater a lot of time. I graduated from Bel Air High School. It's where I went to school. And when you think about it, we had 1,000 students in our graduating class. And so I came from a school that had 1,000 students in our graduating class to one that had, with our freshman class, right at 400 students. But when I was thinking about college, I always knew I'd have to be a commuter student because we couldn't afford the dorm with our family income that we had. And I probably thought I was going to attend the University of Houston, is where I thought I would probably end up going and be a commuter student. And that was primarily because of the economics. My dad was a salesman, And he'd have good weeks and bad weeks, and, it was all dependent on what he sold. And my mother worked in the nursery at River Oaks Baptist Church. But things started to change. On October the 30th, 1963, an evangelist named Billy Graham was coming to speak at a religious emphasis week here at Houston Baptist College back then. The word got out to all the high schools that if you want to come hear Reverend Graham speak, well then you can get out of class free. You can get out of high school free. You don't have to come back. You can come hear Reverend Graham. Well, my twin brother and I were always looking for a reason to get out of school. So we came to Reverend Graham's talk that day here at Houston Baptist University. And I was amazed. There were over 5,000 people that were jammed into the quadrangle area. We had people upstairs around the second floor area. We had people in MD Anderson Student Center. We had chairs all along the patio area out there in the quadrangle. And Dr. Graham delivered a message about hope and faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, but he also delivered a message about the importance of Christian education. And at that same time, Dr. Hinton shared a brief message, and the college singers, now the university singers, sang a few hymns or songs back then, and I was super impressed. And so was my brother. And at that same time, as I said, we were attending River Oaks Baptist Church, and that's not because we were wealthy from River Oaks, because we lived over in Bel Air, but at the same time, my pastor, Dr. Denham, who Denham Hall is named after, he would mention periodically about this new college that was going to be out on the southwest side of town. It was named Houston Baptist College. You ought to consider it. Well, I kind of thought about that, but then Dr. Hinton came one Sunday and preached at River Oaks Baptist Church, and he shared a message, but he also shared about Houston Baptist College. So shortly after that, I applied to HBU, and I got accepted at HBC, and I got a grant and aid. I didn't get a scholarship. I didn't have the grades when I was going to Bel Air, but I got a grant and aid to work for Coach Vass, who was the athletic director, and my brother and I worked for the athletic department for 4 years out here at Houston Baptist College back then. As Helen shared, we met the first night before classes at that event where I was sitting behind her, and we didn't realize it, but the very first day we were in the same class, the first period, Dr. Turner's biology class of all classes. And we sat right next to each other in the biology class. And then our second class was freshman core. So we walked from the biology class to the core class, and we did that our entire freshman year. Our first date was on October the 10th, 1964. She wants me to remember that date, and I remember that date. I don't know what took me so long from Labor Day to October 10th to ask her for a date, but it did. I'm kind of slow on the uptake sometimes. We got engaged on April the 10th, 1967. We dated throughout college here at HBC. And we got married on May 25th, 1968. Yes, that's right. We celebrated 50 years of marriage this year. So we got married on the 25th. We had our baccalaureate, which was more like a worship service for the graduates, on the 26th, which was a Sunday. And we graduated on May the 27th, which was a Monday, at 10 o'clock in the morning. After the graduation, my mother-in-law comes over and says, Don, why don't y'all drop by and have some cake, some wedding cake? I said, no, 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 no. We're off to our honeymoon. We're not stopping for any cake. So I didn't stop and have cake with mother-in-law that time. Helen decided at graduation, to walk under the Anderson name. So I graduated first. She graduated right behind me. She walked right behind me. And my brother Bob was third. Because it was Robert. He was behind Helen. When we were here, HBC was an NCAA Division I school. We competed against some big schools. And I can remember as students here, my brother and I were big time into athletics, watching it. We weren't that good to play on any of the teams, but we would make road trips to Corpus Christi and Beaumont and any number, San Antonio, and any number of places to the mainly basketball games. And we would always return in time to make classes the next day. But there was one basketball game that I vividly remember. Now remember, the physical plant out here wasn't that big. The electrical capability wasn't all that great on the campus of HBC back then. If you got an electrical storm or a rainstorm that came through, you could lose the lights pretty quickly. I can remember Charlie Bonds, and he spoke here last year at Founders Day, he and Carol Ann. I can remember him. He was our top-notch guard. He was our top scorer. He was dribbling, and it was a close game. He was dribbling. He'd stolen the ball, and he was dribbling for the basket. And he was going up for a layup. And the electrical storms were going outside, and the rain was coming down, and the power went off. Just as Charlie released the ball into the air, nobody knows to this day whether he scored those points or not. And I talked to Charlie afterward. I said, Charlie, how did it feel going up for the basket to make a basket, and then the lights went out? He said, I thought one of two things. Either my head hit the backboard or I had a stroke. Because he said it was frightening. It was terrible. We ended up winning that game. Anyway, I told you that Bob and I worked in the athletic department, and our main job was to take care of the baseball fields. And the baseball fields were not where they are now, and the baseball fields now look a lot better than when Bob and I took care of the baseball fields. We had them out north of the campus, okay, close this side of the new entrance out there. And so we had to create a baseball field out of weeds and everything. And so we had to drag the infield. I mean, we were out there doing wheelies on the tractor and dragging the infield and trying to get it smooth. But they also asked us to put in the fence. And so we said, you want us to put the fence in? Yeah, well, cyclone fence, we want you to put it in, So we had post hole digger, manual, dig all those holes, because we didn't have any money out here at the university, and cement it and everything and put it in. And we got the fence up, stretched the wire out. We didn't have the equipment to do that, but we stretched it all out. We got the fence up in time for Coach Vass to play a game. But if you stood on the side, you could see the fence kind of went like that. But we put a fence in here at HBC. One of my fondest memories is the Corians. That was our service fraternity, and you couldn't have a social fraternity back then. The Corians' main thing was spirit, so we tried to promote spirit on campus. And my brother and I were the original mascot keepers for the husky, okay? Now, the deal is, we didn't have a husky back then. We had a Samoyed, okay? If you know what a Samoyed is a white-haired dog, and it's got long hair, okay? And so our first time to run the dog in front of the basketball team here at a home game, we had never tested it out before. We just started, Toby, you can run in with us, And so Bob's on one side, I'm on the other side. We're running in Toby. Toby slipped and slided, and he went all the way across the floor. Needless to say, we didn't have the fiercest mascot back then. We kind of messed it up. That's what we did. At homecoming, we would build bonfires, and we built some pretty large bonfires. We got them up to 50 to 60 foot high. We would call the telephone company, bring in telephone poles, plant those telephone poles. Then we would go off and use the old truck, the 1950s truck, and we would go off to the 7-Up plant, and we would bring in crates that hold the 7-Up, the old crates that were busted up. They'd let us have them. We brought them back here. Well, we were in this big old truck one time, coming down Beach Nut, getting on Fondren, and turning in front of the school. We'd have this thing stacked up 10 levels above the truck. And the guy that, Damon Ankerman, a good friend of mine, was driving the truck that day. He's about 5'4", and he turned in too fast. We dumped the entire load right in front of the school. And so we're out there scurrying to try to pick up the remains of that in front of the school. We thought we were going to be kicked out, but fortunately Dr. Hinton was out of town back then. We had the early traditions. We had the beanies back then. Oh, by the way, in 1964, we beat the freshmen. And so in the tug of war, we beat the freshmen back, the sophomores back then. One of the things we used to do, I don't know if you do it anymore, when somebody got engaged, a guy got engaged, we threw him in the fountain. And so we'd throw guys into the fountain. I got thrown in the fountain. My brother got thrown in the fountain. If any of you remember Dr. Lozier when he was out here, several of us helped throw him in the fountain whenever he got engaged to Elsa Jean. Just to wrap it up, today is Founders Day. I thought I would read the first sentence or two of the preamble of the to the Constitution of Houston Baptist College or Houston Baptist University. The Houston Baptist College is a Christian liberal arts college. Its purpose is to offer a curriculum of studies and a program of student activities dedicated to the development of moral character, the enrichment of spiritual lives, and the perpetuation of growth in Christian ideals. Founded under the providence of God and the conviction that there is a need for a college in the community that will train the mind and develop moral character and enrich the spiritual lives of all people who may come within the ambit of its influence. That's what the founders saw. That's what they saw, that the purpose of our university, it was and still is today. Following that statement, and you can read it on your own, there is a very strong statement of faith in belief in God, in Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. It is no accident that Helen and I went to HBU and were accepted here at HBU. Our favorite scripture as a family is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. We did that. We could have gone to University of Houston or Hardin-Simmons, but God was directing us to be at HBU. I have had the distinct privilege of knowing all three presidents of our university. Dr. Hinton was a true pioneer. That took a lot of faith, and he took a big risk in coming and being the first president of Houston Baptist College. Dr. Hodo was a great administrator. He helped the university out whenever there was some serious financial issues going on, and he was a great administrator. But Dr. Sloan, our current president, is a true visionary for the 21st century. Our prayer is that God will continue to bless HBU and each of you on your life's journey. Best wishes from an alumnus of 50-something years ago. Thank you.